to the bar on Friday with a couple friends and you're trying to use SMS to send messages and arrange a place to meet, and I get to reorder, replay, or drop all of your messages, good luck getting to the same bar that night. It's probably not going to happen, right? And this is important for your enterprise applications in the same way. And there are solutions to this in the web service security standards. I don't mean to imply that it's completely left off the table, but they're not always interoperable. Sometimes they're custom. Sometimes they're still being baked. And you have to realize that you need to apply one of these solutions. In SSL, you kind of get all these properties for free. And so you're walking away from money on the table. When you go to one of these other technologies, now have to start thinking about all these issues that you didn't have to think about before. Transport layer security is also a very proven success with message-oriented protocols. MSRPC, LDAP, there's a bunch of other protocols that apply. MSRPC is a little bit of a hybrid, but there's a bunch of other protocols that have successfully applied transport level security rather than individual message security successfully for message systems. Email being the biggest example, which is our second thought experiment here, where this is one of the few truly message-oriented enterprise applications. And if you think about it, SSL secures orders of magnitude more email than any kind of per message solution out there like PGP or something. In that, I have a trust boundary inside my company email system, where I can send messages without worrying about a bunch of encryption because I have accountability, because I have a trusted system. And when I connect to my company email for Outlook Web Access or something, or Gmail, I do that over SSL. So I'm relying on SSL to connect the endpoint securely, and I'm establishing trust boundaries. I think that's something that we need to think about when we're looking at these new technologies, message-oriented technologies critically. What are the real trust boundaries? I see things in books like, well, if you're using a message queue, once your message is decrypted and in the queue, it has no protection. Well, I think if the attacker owns your message queue system, you're probably done anyway, right? Your game is over. So think about where you want to put those trust boundaries and build your system that way. The third reason I think message-oriented security loses is it tends to create a tight coupling between your security and your application layers. Especially the web service and XML standards expose things like URIs, XPath, XPointers, XSLT, complicated systems for identifying the content of the message. And that's not something that you necessarily have in common at every layer. It's not something that an external gateway can necessarily do consistently with your internal application logic. You would think that those systems are well-defined, simple. XPath is a simple algorithm. XSLTs are simple algorithms. You would think the same thing, hopefully, about TCP fragment reassembly. But we saw with the work that Newsham and Toshek did on IDS evasions that there often are big variances between these systems. And so having external control points or it's the old multiple parser problem that you have to make sure that every parser behaves in the same way. And we'll talk about this some more later. Complexity. This is just a sample scenario of one way of using web service security. So you can see we have a message originating at A, only part of which is signed, which goes through a gateway C, which adds another part to the message, signs the whole thing with another key that's remotely referenced somewhere, encrypts it to a third key, forwards it on by a number of protocols. There's a lot going on there. There's a lot that can go wrong. They were so complicated that even the standards needed standards. So the Web Service Interoperability Organization was created. Most people tend to think that that's kind of dead in the water right now. Version 1.1 and 1.0 of the basic security profile are both still in draft stage. And there's just even some of these higher level protocols, things like WS Trust, has the word should over 40 times in the specification, which makes it really hard to reason about. This is a security protocol, and things like whether parts of the message are signed or not says it should be signed. Well, it makes it very hard to assess and make good judgments and reason about how these protocols work. And complexity and subtlety like that are always the enemies of security. And again, you're throwing away more stuff that you get for free with SSL, where you have a strongly authenticated, mutually encrypted and integrity-protected channel with symmetric keys and well-understood properties. With web service security, you need to know, should I encrypt first and then sign? Should I sign first and encrypt? Do I do sign, encrypt, sign? How do I avoid forwarding attacks, ciphertext mutation attacks, things like that? Which of these tokens do I want to use? A SAML token? Do I want to use a Kerberos token? All of these things are policy decisions. All these things are costs. All these things are things you can get wrong. Basically, it's a security protocol construction toolkit, not a ready-to-use, out-of-the-box tool like SSL. And, Years of dedicated advocacy by Bruce Schneier and others have said that if you see someone writing their own cryptographic algorithm, it's broken. You don't even have to look at it. You just know it's broken. If you're not a cryptographer, don't do it. And I think the same applies for cryptographic authentication protocols. If you're writing protocols, it's broken. You should be using something that has been set up because most people just don't have the qualifications to do that. And unfortunately, when you're setting all these policy flags, this gigantic swamp of policy that exists around web service security, you're creating a new protocol with every policy you set. And experts get this kind of stuff wrong all the time, especially the subtle distinctions in public key cryptography, such as the naive sign and encrypt forwarding flaw found in PKNet Kerberos in 2005. It just goes to show that you really do need to be cautious about these things and have people that not only understand but have a red team that can help you attack these systems if you're going to be creating your own policy endpoints. And we'll illustrate this here with a brief tale of two services here. Two services with different needs. One's a synchronous service, and it's going to have lots of data sent with privacy and integrity, and you need mutual authentication. The second service is going to be an asynchronous message that you only need to sign, only need integrity protection, no confidentiality requirement. So our first service, we'll do SSL without client auth, and we'll put a Kerberos token on it. So the client authenticates the server with SSL server certificate. The server authenticates the client with the Kerberos token. The message is protected and has privacy protections, as does the Kerberos ticket. All the security assertions are satisfied. There are no attacks against this system that I know of. Now we take our second service, and here we're going to send this message over plain text, and we're going to use a Kerberos token again, and we're going to sign the entire message with the secret in that Kerberos token. So again, this meets all of its security requirements. There aren't attacks against this system. If we put them both together, though, on the same system, and both services are hosted by the same Kerberos principal, we have an attack appear because the policy for service B protects the message but doesn't protect the security token. So the attacker can intercept that message, prevent delivery, take the token, and replay it against through a non-mutually authenticated SSL channel. So this is just one example with two services. If you have 50 different policies for 100 different endpoints in your enterprise system, you imagine how complicated doing this kind of analysis gets. This is a repurpose of some work by some Finnish hackers, Kaslan and Tikkanen. They did it against traditional Kerberos services. It works just fine against web service as well, and it works with SAML also. So just again, an example of how setting policies is the same as building protocols. And SSL, again, takes care of all this for free, had a lot of engineering put into it to make sure that you're not vulnerable to these kind of attacks, especially if you use mutual authentication. So to debunk some SSL myths here. First myth is that SSL is not appropriate and won't work for message-oriented applications. And we've discussed this a little bit briefly here that, in most cases, all you need to really handle the security assertions of most applications is an mutually authenticated channel with strong audit and strong privacy protections and integrity protections. And SSL gives you all of that. Kind of the only mainstream cases today where SSL is not adequate by itself are things like SAML and WS Federation, the web single sign-on protocols, where we have passive participants, a web browser that's not a trusted participant forwarding a message on behalf of someone else. And so these are the few cases where you need these kind of durable assertions. But even there, where some of these protocols were designed theoretically to be usable over plain text channels, attacks have been discovered that necessitate using SSL at every step of the way for additional protections. Another typical downside for SSL or myth about SSL is the difficulty managing client certificates. And this is true for 1 million or 2 million browser clients, and people are changing their web browsers all the time. But if we're talking web service endpoints with B2B type communications, your endpoints are typically going to be applications that are under change control and change management, and managing client certificates in this case becomes a whole lot easier. And it's probably something you're going to have to do with message-oriented security anyway. So not an issue for SSL here. A lot of people kind of have a pathological dislike of certificate authorities. I could be convinced that they're not necessarily doing the job that they should in all cases, but again, this isn't a problem if you have programmatic clients. You need a public root of trust if you're going to have 1 million web browsers talking to you. If you're going to have 100 business partners talking to you, you can do it all with self-signed certs. You can use the certificate authority built into a Windows server or OpenSSL or a variety of other free alternatives to that. Just cut out the middleman, cut out the cost and expense of managing those certs. You can issue the same cert 100 times to your whole server farm and not have to pay a dime to anyone. The broken trust model, the phishing, user Chrome issues, how does the user verify certificates, again, are browser issues, don't apply to SSL in a programmatic context. Computers are very good at making a determination, this is the right key, this is the right name. SSL is too heavyweight. I've heard this, which is kind of hilarious compared to the big protocol stack we just saw for web service security. And Microsoft recently published some benchmarks for Windows Communications Foundation. And they never put them all on the same line. But if you go and move them along onto the same axis from different graphs, you see that using WS Security to do signing and encryption compared to SSL cuts throughput by between a factor of 5 and a factor of 50. And when you add on SSL acceleration onto that, which is widely available and cheap, whereas XML security acceleration, I only am aware of one company that does it, and because it's XML mangling, it's not as fast, it's not as easily put into hardware acceleration, and it's going to be more expensive. You might be talking a factor of 100-fold slowdown to use WS Security everywhere in place of SSL. Terminating SSL at the CorpNet edge. Another reason I hear this one's a little more legitimate as far as the durability of the protections on the message as it travels through your whole system. But again, think about the email analogy, think about your trust model. What you really want to secure in systems are trust boundaries. Once a message is inside your system, maybe it's okay to forward on. Maybe you don't need to take all this extra complexity and extra cost of adding another layer of message security on top of it once it's reached a trust boundary. Email works this way all the time. We don't PGP sign every single message we send to people internally in our company on the same mail server. Usually the infrastructure is good enough and we have accountability to back us up there. You can add signatures on top of a message sent through SSL if you really need this. But again, so, excuse me here, drink. So what do you really get if you choose to go with web service security? You do get that durable assertion. In the case of encryption, this is very useful for some certain kinds of authentication technologies, but for most of what we're going to do, it's not really the kind of encryption that you want. You have per-message keys that are wrapped up with public key encryption. If you're doing this to try and, say, meet PCI requirements, XML encrypt everything and put it in the database that way, you're going to have very slow search. You're going to have an incredibly slow database, and it's very hard to rekey these, which is going to fail your PCI requirements again there. And basically, I would say that if you're going to make your data this hard to get at and not make it searchable and not make it accessible, you're probably better off just not storing that data in the first place. Just delete it, and then you don't have a privacy incident waiting to happen. So digital signatures are the big win here. Durable accountability, durable non-repudiation to the extent that such is possible is a really big win, and this is the biggest thing that these technologies have to offer. But that really gets us more accountability, and in most cases we've seen we already have accountability. So the takeaway here from this part is that the only thing you really get with message-oriented security that's new is accountability. And you get accountability where you already had it, and at the cost of a great deal of complexity and risk exposure that you didn't